Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Academic Skills Part 2 presentation. My name is Betty Sims, and I currently serve as a retention specialist and coordinator for academic programs here at the AAC. I also use she, her, hers pronouns. So even though this is a recorded session, I will try to make it as interactive as possible. So if you could have a pen and a piece of paper nearby, that will really help when we do some kind of guided reflection activities. I also want to remind you that after this presentation, there will be a discussion post to complete via Canvas. So today we're going to do the following. We're going to review some time management skills. We are going to do some reflecting on motivation, what it is for us, and how we can maintain it. And lastly, we're going to do an activity around academic resilience and how it is present in our lives. So, what is time management? At a basic level, time management is the process of organizing and planning how to divide your time between specific tasks. There are many strategies to go about doing this, including using a planner, a calendar, phone notifications, etc. Today, however, we're going to dive a bit deeper and actually examine how we choose to divide our time, as this is a key element of time management. To begin thinking about this, we'll be discussing the big rocks, little rocks metaphor. You can see an illustration of this on the slide. To begin, imagine that all the tasks you need to accomplish are divided into big rocks, being the important tasks, pebbles, which are the things that may not be as important, and sand, being the things that do not help us achieve our goals. Now imagine trying to put all of this material into a large glass container. When we approach this by putting the sand and or the pebbles in first, there is no room for the big rocks. However, when we approach things a little bit differently and put the big rocks in first and the pebbles and sand second and third, everything will be able to fit in the jar. So when we make time to prioritize those things in our lives that we identify as the big rocks, the pebbles and the sand will fit in, thereby helping us to achieve more in the same amount of time. So as we consider this metaphor, what comes up for you? So grab that pen and paper that you have nearby and take a second to journal or write down a few things that come up. How have you managed your time up to this point? Do you tend to think about prioritizing important tasks first? If so, that's great. If you're like me, however, this may be something that you are continuing to practice. So, how do we decide what the big rocks in our lives are? What are the things that are taking up space that are distracting to us? So, one strategy for prioritization is to use the urgent versus important matrix, as you can see here. So in the top left corner of the matrix are things that are urgent and important. These are things that require immediate attention, such as navigating a crisis, pressing problems, things with looming deadlines. So this might be something like the essay that you have due at noon and it's 10 a.m. and you're still trying to finish it. That's something that's important and urgent. In the next quadrant in the upper right-hand corner, we have things that are not urgent but important. This includes things like planning out our week, building a community of support on campus, and even some academic tasks such as preparing for an exam that's maybe a week away. Next, in the bottom left quadrant, we have things that are not important, but that can feel urgent. So these are things that are interruptions, some calls, even some emails and meetings, things that kind of pop up and demand our attention, but don't really contribute towards our overarching goals. Lastly, in the bottom right quadrant, we have things that are not urgent and not important. These are things that don't really help us meet our goals at all. One example of this might be excessive use of social media, especially when it's being used as a method of procrastination. There's nothing wrong with social media. It's definitely really important, but it does sometimes get in the way of helping us to meet our goals. I also want to acknowledge that tasks can move from one category to another. I mentioned earlier the idea of preparing for an exam. So it definitely can start off in the important and not urgent category, but if we don't give it the time and attention that it needs, it can shift into this important and urgent category because we have a looming deadline. The same thing is true with the example of social media. It can definitely fall into the not urgent and not important category when we're trying to focus on other things, but it also can be really important because it helps us maintain that sense of connection to our community. So, again, things can change depending on our situation and our context. So, as we consider this, where do you think you spend most of your time? If you're like me, it at times it feels like I can spend time bouncing between the urgent and important category and the not urgent and not important category, especially when I become more stressed. It is best to spend most of our time in the important and not urgent category as well as the important and urgent category. We want to spend, as I mentioned, most of our time in the important and not urgent quadrant, while also managing the things that are popping up in the important slash urgent quadrant as well. So for the next few minutes, while we are reflecting on this urgent and important matrix, think about the next 7 days of your life. What are some things that are coming up right now that you would place into the important and not urgent category? So in this top right hand matrix, what are the things that you can do to address those pieces now so that they don't transition into the important and urgent category? So now that we know how important it is to spend most of our time in the urgent slash important category, it is really helpful to have a good connection to our source of motivation. So, as an activity, we're now going to pull out that pen and paper and do a quick 1 minute reflective journal prompt. So, please feel free to pause the video here if you need more time because it's best to be as specific and thorough as possible. But first, please think of a time when you were motivated. What was happening and how did you feel? So, this is maybe a time when you were feeling really good, feeling really positive, really able to get a lot of things done in just the way that you wanted. What was happening for you? How did you feel? What were those tasks? What was going on? Were there any distractions? And how did you manage those? So once you have that written down, next, now think of a time when you were not motivated. What was happening? How did you feel? What did you do to accomplish what needed to be accomplished? What did not get completed? What gets in the way of feeling motivated? Um, and what happened? Lastly, make a list of some things you feel very competent at as they relate to academics specifically. So maybe you feel like you're really good at writing. Writing is definitely a skill that can help us be really successful. Maybe you feel that you're more of a math person. If that's the case, math is absolutely another thing that can help us be really successful in college as we navigate different classes. What comes up for you when you think about different skills that you're bringing to the table? Maybe you're someone who is always in class. You're that person who, no matter what's happening, you're there ready to take notes and then ready to absorb the content of the lecture. Maybe you're someone that is always ready and willing to ask for help, whether that means asking a classmate or stopping by to talk with the instructor or connecting with the TA. All of these things will help you to manage your motivation as well as to manage your time. So, how do we increase and maintain motivation? Here are some tips to help. The first is to set measurable goals. So sometimes we have a tendency to be a bit vague about the things that we want. For example, I often find that when I talk to students about what they want their semester to look like, they will respond with, I want to do well academically. And this is so great. But what does it mean to do well academically? This can be quite different depending on the individual. So, does that mean you want to get a certain GPA? Does it mean that there's a certain class that you want to do well in? Or maybe it means that you just want to have time to like fully engage with the material. When we are vague about our goals, it's often hard to know when they've been accomplished. And having this sense of accomplishment when we meet our goals is key to maintaining motivation. The next tip is to recognize our accomplishments. When was the last time that you celebrated an accomplishment you were proud of? Maybe it was being accepted into CSU, or maybe it was graduating from high school or with your associates. Either way, it's really important that we recognize both the large accomplishments, such as graduation, and the smaller accomplishments. Maybe it is, hey, I studied every day for this upcoming exam. That's something to celebrate. Next is to take time to rest. Please take care of yourselves. Make sure that you get enough sleep, make sure that you're eating, making sure that you're taking care of your mental health, and also connecting to communities that care for and respect you. Next, we have create routine and rituals. Rituals and routine are extremely helpful. For example, one routine I have is to make sure that I do laundry every Sunday. It's definitely not a glamorous routine, but it does help me to feel more prepared for the week. What are some things that you like to do weekly that help you feel more prepared? Maybe it's laundry like me, maybe it's just taking a look at what's coming up for you this next week so you can feel emotionally and mentally prepared. Maybe it's something else entirely. Lastly, the biggest tip that I have is to cultivate academic resilience. So we'll talk more about this in the next few slides, but know that academic resiliency essentially is the ability to achieve your goals despite experiencing adversity. So many of you, being the first in your families, have experienced times when you've had to advocate for yourself or to navigate a system that can be really complicated and confusing, like our educational system. So I want to emphasize that just by being here, every single one of you already has cultivated this skill, and it can also be something that can help you moving forward, maintain your motivation, and meet all of your goals. So, as I mentioned, academic resiliency is our ability to meet our goals despite facing adversity. As we keep this in mind, also know that time management and motivation, for that matter, is a skill that can be developed. It's not something that we either have or don't have. As we continue to practice these things, we will continue to grow in these areas. As I also mentioned, motivation can change. It won't always be constant. So, how do we have a sense of awareness when we're feeling really motivated? How do we have a sense of awareness when we're not feeling motivated? And what are things we can do to build that motivation or to be kind to ourselves when we just aren't feeling it? And just to reiterate the point that I already made, just by being here at CSU, you've already demonstrated a sense of resiliency and accomplishment. And that is something to be very proud of. So, as we end our session today, we will be doing one final closing activity. So, again, please pull out that pen and paper. Feel free to pause the video to give yourself a little bit more time to reflect on some of these questions that I'll be asking. But this is really an activity that builds upon the idea that everyone has academic resilience already. So, to begin, think of a time in the past when you have faced a difficult situation regarding academics. What was the situation? Please try to think in as much detail as possible. It might be helpful to write that down. Now, what supports did you use? What kept you going? Was it your values of maybe never quitting, or your friends, family giving you words of encouragement. Maybe it was Netflix. Maybe that was a really important coping mechanism for you during this time. But again, try to think and be as specific as possible of the different supports that are present in your life that kept you going. Next, try to list some of the strategies that kept you moving. So maybe it was prioritizing a few different tasks before a really tight deadline. Maybe it was breaking up something that seemed really huge and unmanageable into manageable pieces. Maybe it was asking for help when you needed it. Next, what was some sagacity that gave you comfort and hope? Sagacity just means words of wisdom and support. So maybe it was connecting with a friend who had also been through a similar situation. Maybe it is that emotional support that your family can provide. What were some words that gave you comfort and hope? And lastly, what were some solution seeking behaviors that you exhibited? Maybe it was, again, asking for help. Maybe it was practice. Maybe it was responding to your own needs of needing a break or checking in with yourself and making sure that you had what you needed. These are behaviors that you use that helped you to meet your goals. Thank you all so much for taking some time to work through this academic resiliency exercise with me. As I mentioned, you all already have academic resiliency within you. Sometimes we maybe feel like we don't. And when those moments are present, feel free to revisit this activity as a way to remind yourself of all of the things that you have already accomplished, as well as a blueprint for what you can do moving forward. Thank you all so much for taking some time to view this presentation. I really appreciate it. As a final reminder, please remember to log into Canvas to complete the discussion post for the week. Thanks.